The rain pounded its way into the concrete landscape. The deluge carried the street's transient contents, litter tossed on the ground, dirt flushed off the buildings, liquids dripped from the vehicles, to the grimy pools enlarging around overwhelmed sewer gutters. The storm was insistent. The sound of so many heavy raindrops wove into a steady roar of water. Two men ran for cover under a black awning that stretched over the sidewalk to the curb. It had been a welcome sight as they rushed around the corner of 95th past a bank and realty office onto 3rd Avenue. They were in too much of a hurry to notice, glistening in the wet night, the gold lettering on the side of the awning and on a large sign stretched across the dark building's exterior, "The Wicked Monk." Safely out of the rain, the men turned to look back out at the street. They could see the lights of the Verrazano Narrows bridge barely visible in the downpour. On a fair evening when they could walk instead of run, they may have appreciated the Gothic look of the edifice joined with surprisingly modern designs. The building even had two craggy, pitted winged gargoyles perched on either side of the sign above the awning. The place was perfect for its location, a combination of monastery and pub nestled in the heart of the traditional Irish community in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn. Despite the awning, the glow from the streetlights managed to reflect off the fresh green paint on the outside door. The luminosity from the windows beckoned with a comforting welcome from the horrific weather. But the two men lingered on the dry pavement for a few minutes. Tyler Jordan was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but not just any silver spoon. He was one of the most recently bred members of a long line of straight-laced professionals, lawyers who went on to become judges after serving well-connected clients and doctors who became medical school deans after caring for patients who did not need health insurance. Tyler Jordan, for example, was chief counsel of a private corporation that appeared to have unlimited possibilities. Even the female children were raised to make a living, albeit a substantial living, and to marry diligent professionals. Tyler's mother, Margaret Calvert, was a professor of constitutional law at Yale and his father, Eugene S. Jordan, was a federal district judge. Jordan children had the finest bilingual nannies and governesses in order to be prepared to attend a particularly refined prep school that provided classes in English and German. Busy parents compensated for the absences due to their jobs and charitable activities by indulging their children. One of the more frequent and enjoyable indulgences was a shopping weekend in London or Paris. This not only provided time for child and parent to bond, but also experience in how to dress and dine properly. The pampering showed in Tyler's every preference and movement. He knew he was stylish and well-bred because his upbringing had been reinforced by university and law school classmates from other wealthy families. Having lived undisturbed in this sealed environment, Tyler was not aware that his entire demeanor was a perfect caricature of the coddled elite. Unfortunately, the coddled elite often have significant gaps in their knowledge of mundane matters such as what to do after being caught in a downpour. Finally out of the rain, Tyler considered how to remove the infinite droplets from his custom-tailored suit. He was 5'7" and weighed at most 165 pounds if he stepped on a scale right then in his soaked clothes. Not certain what to do, he tried shaking his whole body frantically like a wet dog, probably because he had seen his dogs do the same thing. Whether this looked odd or even ridiculous was irrelevant. An advantage of having led a gilded life is that one rarely feels self-conscious about one's actions except in the company of one's equals. Tyler had taken off his glasses so they wouldn't fly off his face while he shook off the rain. Putting them back on, he realized he needed to clean the wet lenses. His tie was too damp, much as he had tried to protect the strip of silk that even he thought was outrageously expensive. He glanced at the pristine French cuffs of his shirt, which had remained dry under the tailored jacket of his suit. The starched fabric was too stiff to do the job. Besides, he did not relish taking off or putting back on his cufflinks. Those were sartorial achievements he always thought should be done only once a day. For a fleeting moment, Tyler thought about asking his associate if he could use his shirt to wipe his glasses. He thought better of it and grudgingly started to delicately wipe his spectacles on his relatively dry shirt pocket. Tyler's associate, Carl Preston, was a former Navy SEAL and CIA field agent, now working as a private contractor providing personal security. No one ever became close enough to him to ask about his past or what he did for a living, but he was prepared to be honest if anyone ever did. He was certain the Inquirer would think he was just being funny, since it sounded like the backstory of movie heroes who are capable of completely unrealistic feats of strength, agility, and accuracy. And if someone thought he was telling the truth, then he was prepared to lie and say he was really a stuntman for the actors who played those roles. Carl did, as they say, fit the part. He measured just over 6 feet 3 inches and weighed an even 225 pounds with about as much body fat as a fitness model or bodybuilding contestant. His head and face were clean-shaven except for a zap of facial growth around his chisel-shaped lips. He was well-mannered, handsome, and charismatic. He was self-confident or, more precisely, self-assured. He not only thought well of his own abilities but also had proven those abilities to a great certainty. Even women that were completely turned off by baldness, bulging muscles, or bearing would give him a second look. He was a real-life fantasy of masculinity. However, Carl Preston had never made time for a part in Aurora family. His jobs had always called for clandestine activities. The lines between his career and his personal life had blurred a long time ago, leaving no room for relationships. He had no problem with keeping his own company and didn't feel the need to indulge in trivial conversation. Carl spent a ridiculous amount of time in the weight room and on the track. He trained with multiple weapons and fighting techniques whenever he was off duty. He never thought twice about being alone. These qualities perfectly suited his career path. The enigma of his personality made Tyler wary of him. Carl knew this and preferred it. It was not his job to become friends with colleagues and clients. Carl observed Tyler straightening his jacket, fixing his glasses, and pulling on his cuffs. Tyler was stalling. Carl knew that standard look of fear. He knew he should keep his mouth shut. But Carl had prepared thoroughly for this meeting, as he had for all of the meetings on their docket. Tyler had not. His lack of preparation showed. He had not thought to check the weather forecast and so was unprepared for the drowning storm. Carl hadn't only needed to put his waterproof hat in the pocket of his waterproof coat when they had reached the shelter of the awning. Carl thought he would have a little fun at Tyler's expense. After his colleague finished readying himself and began walking toward the entrance of the pub, Carl stopped him with a slight grin. "You might want to rethink your wardrobe, sir. At least take off the tie and lose the glasses. I wouldn't want someone breaking your specs or choking you with your own tie," he taunted lightly. "You know, just in case there's a confrontation." Tyler looked down at his tie and began to take it off. Then he decided against it. He knew he felt uneasy, a mixture of the location and his wetsuit. While how the hoi polloi perceived his actions was not a concern, appearance was everything. Not everyone had the genes or motivation to look like Carl. Tyler decided he should be himself rather than try to fit in.
"I think it's important I keep a professional look. I'm going to stand out anyway walking in with you."
Carl admired his colleagues with under pressure but wasn't going to hold back. "Do you really think a pair of glasses will make people think you are Clark Kent ready to whip them off and become Superman?" Carl chided, half closing his eyes as he grinned. "In this place, it's a ticket for ridicule. I'm telling you this for your own good, sir." Tyler sighed and shook his head.
"I have succeeded this long in life being able to identify what is in my best interests. I do not need you to identify them for me."
Carl smirked. Tyler Jordan wouldn't know how to act if he changed his attire. He was too used to looking like a prep school product and having everyone defer to him as a result. Let him get a taste of the gritty life then.
"Let's do this, shall we?"
Tyler walked to the door, paused, and opened it wide for Carl.
"Maybe you should go first. That is, after all, your job."
Carl grinned and stepped toward the entrance. "Thank you, Mr. Jordan," he said with the faintest sarcasm. As Carl opened the second door, the smell of Irish stew filled his nostrils and reminded him of so many similar moments. While Carl was not Irish in the least, he had roamed enough of these streets to try the authentic fare at many a hole in the wall and knew how to appreciate the traditional dishes offered at each one. The interior of the Wicked Monk was unique for a pub anywhere. The woodwork behind the bar was carved oak, hundreds of years old and remarkably well preserved. A brass sign touted this fact along the far wall. The piece had been shipped to the States decades before from the refectory of an old rural monastery in Ireland. Beautiful stained glass rescued from abandoned churches surrounded all of the light fixtures. A rustic feel was added by rough rock walls surrounding a large, traditional fireplace. Two old confessional booths that had once housed pay phones now had several power outlets to charge mobile phones, tablets, and laptops. With Wi-Fi and a pulpit made into a DJ area, the place had a perfect balance between modern technology and an authentic medieval atmosphere. Leave it to the Irish to get pissed in a divine environment, Carl thought. It certainly made drinking seem like a holy endeavor. Carl and Tyler did not go unnoticed as they entered the bar. 3 regulars heard the 2 men ask the bartender and several patrons if they knew a Mr. Timothy O'Rinn. The biggest of the men watching their every move looked like a mountain beside 2 large companion hills. Tipping the scales at 300 plus and towering at close to 6'5", one needed to pack a lunch after surviving his right hook. He didn't just walk over to where Tyler was talking to some customers, he swayed from the side to side, like a big tree buffeted back and forth in the wind. His enormous bulk was carried on trunk-like legs. Overdeveloped pectorals, biceps, and back muscles bulged from the 4XL shirt plastered over his monstrous body. "What the fuck does the 2 of you want in here?" The big man had an oddly high-pitched voice for someone his size. "You cops or something?" His heavy Brooklyn accent didn't help with understanding him. Carl, who had been speaking to an older man at the bar, didn't have to turn to assess the situation. Tyler, however, not fully understanding, turned to the man.
"Oh, no."
He offered a handshake but his extended arm was ignored. He dropped his palm as an afterthought in the dense silence that followed his timid attempt to defuse a situation that had escalated for no logical reason. His next words were a painful fumble.
"Yes, well, my name is Tyler Jordan and this is my associate, Mr."
"If ya's not cops, I don't fucking care," the giant said. "And if ya was, I still don't." He stepped forward, still menacing, making it plain they were completely unwelcome in the establishment. Carl, glancing without turning his head, could tell by the look on Tyler's face that he had no idea why they were being confronted. Tyler put his right hand on his chest, as he always did when he became nervous. He tried again. Sweat appeared on his upper lip.
"Okay. We are looking for Mr. O'Rinn, Timothy O."
"What you want with Tim?" The man looked down fiercely at Tyler, never glancing at Carl, who was standing to his left at the bar as calmly as though nothing was happening. The brawler grabbed Tyler by the arm, his meaty hand entirely encircling Tyler's left bicep, and squeezed. Carl remained motionless.
"Sir, you are making a terrible mistake,"
Tyler argued. Having never been manhandled, the lawyer continued to speak as though he was reasoning with a colleague or client.
"We just want to offer Mr. O'Rinn a job."
And then, recognizing what was his most serious concern, Tyler looked at the man's fingers wrapped around his left arm and issued a stout appeal.
"Please, this is a bespoke suit."
The man had absolutely no idea what Tyler said. Bespoke meant nothing to him. Tyler cherished his clothes. He looked pleadingly to Carl. A bit of help wouldn't hurt. The giant seemed to read his mind. "Move a muscle, Baldy, and I'll wipe the floor with ya," he said, pointing at Carl with his free hand without even looking at him. He had read the situation. Carl was muscle and would take direction from Tyler. The beast grabbed Tyler's other arm and began to lift him off his feet with the intent to remove him from the pub and dump him unceremoniously in the street at the nearest backed-up sewer. Since their mass arrival in the mid-1800s, Irishmen in New York had created an image of being remorselessly violent, particularly when backed up with a lot of brawn. This particular bouncer took a great relish in flexing his heritage. "Gonry and Tadleet," Carl said in a calm, deep voice that demanded attention. A few gray heads looked up from their pints and sniggered. The giant was baffled. He looked back at his buddies, then at Carl, swinging Tyler about as he turned. He was not the type who liked being interrupted or played the fool. He glowered at Carl and asked stiffly, "What did you just say?" A half-drunk man suddenly stumbled out of one of the confessional booths.
"Butch Flaherty, do ya not know our mother tongue? The gent said good luck with that in Gililge, ya big, fucking ox."
The huge man unfixed his hands from Tyler's arms and took a step back in response to a sharp look from the insulting interpreter. Butch didn't think but reacted as a bully usually does. He took one step toward Carl. Bad mistake. Carl did not give him time to think about what his next move would be. Before Butch knew where he was at, Carl had moved swiftly to the side of him, kicking the backside of his right knee, bringing the giant down to earth. Carl then spun a 180 placing his back against Butch and reached around his neckless torso latching onto his throat. Butch's head was relaxed on Carl's right shoulder. Butch heard a soft whisper of death in his ear telling him that if he moved one more inch, his neck would be snapped or his throat would be ripped out. The choice was his. Carl squeezed the breath away from his lungs in an attempt to demonstrate the meaning behind the words. Butch acknowledged Carl as he put his hand up in the air to halt any attempt of a rescue from his buddies. Then, without another word, Butch was standing upright again. He didn't understand what just happened, but as he turned around to face Carl, he soon realized how close he came to visiting his ancestors. As the drunken red-headed stranger steadied himself after that dramatic entrance and the fine display of animalistic alpha males, the man suddenly appeared to be within his faculties no matter how much booze may have been in his system. Still, the giant hovered in front of Tyler and Carl, uncertain if he should let the strangers get too close from what little control he believed he possessed.
"Mr. Timothy R.N., I presume?"
Tyler said, sighing with relief while smoothing the fabric of his precious suit from the creases caused by the bouncer's grip. Orin walked up to the table nearest Tyler.
"Aye. Buy me a drink and I'll be ye fucking mother. Pull up you."
His reply in a thick Irish accent sounded as though he had said the same thing many times over the years. Tyler stepped toward him and extended his hand, but Orin turned away and took a seat.
"Excuse me cousin, lads. Butch means well enough but he comes on overly strong at times."
If the bar staff had a penny for every time he cracked at one, they'd be retired on the payoffs. Timothy Orin looked the part of an Irishman with his shaggy red hair, more a strawberry blonde he had always insisted, but red enough to be the butt of many ginger jokes. The jokes never bothered Tim. Not much did. His eyes were clear blue when they weren't red-rimmed from too much whiskey. He had dimples set deep in his cheeks around a well-defined nose with a slight curve to the left on the bridge. The broken nose gave his otherwise innocent-looking face a counterbalancing rough quality. He just never let anyone know it was the result of his face hitting a rock after he tripped. Instead he allowed people to think he had taken that hard of a punch. He pulled off the effortless look of rumpled clothes and mussed hair naturally, which actually meant that he just didn't make a lot of effort to begin with. Not that any of that mattered much. Tim had the stereotypical gift of gab and luck of the Irish. Women loved his accent. They couldn't get enough of it. At 5'8" he had a moderate build from carrying equipment around every day at work. He had been gaining a beer-induced rubber tire though in the 2 years since he turned 30. He hadn't noticed. Tim only looked in a mirror to shave and he never did that 2 days in a row. He felt no reason to lack self-confidence, wasn't afraid to laugh at himself, and thought modesty had something to do with women not showing much skin. He was who he was. He was known locally as Rockstar Orin because of his degree in geology. Obsessed by crystalline rocks and unique formations, Tim was really only interested in the mineralogy aspect of the field. Folks in the neighborhood just knew Tim was interested in rocks and geology-involved rocks. Tim knew it was for this rather boring reason that he had earned this nickname, but it still sounded cool enough. Like most things he just went with it. Tim was a charmer and a drinker, although the more he drank the less charming he often became. Once the bartender had set up 2 old-fashioned glasses with a good half-inch of straight whiskey in them. Orin claimed the closest to him at the table and tilted it forward to peer at the liquid as though he was reading tea leaves.
"Mr. Orin? I am Tyler Jordan and this is my associate, Mr. Carl Preston."
"What are you after?"
Tim asked, sounding completely bored. His mind was on whether he wanted the whiskey, knowing Butch had probably ordered it so he wouldn't have to back down again. Not much could excite him. A new beer on the market might spark a flash of interest. Timothy Orynt had arrived in the United States with his parents and 2 siblings when he was 11 years old. New arrivals clustered in the old neighborhood that had been home for Irish immigrants since the famine. Tim thought the whole country must be full of Irish people because those were all he encountered on the streets, in the shops, and at mass. Among the browns, greys, and black of the city, his memories of Green Ireland began to fade. They were permanently extinguished the night his parents, sister, and brother died in an apartment fire along with his aunt and uncle and their 2 children. Tim was spending the night with a schoolmate, the first friend he had made since emigrating 6 months earlier. Tim's uncle Jackie, owner of the Wicked Monk, had brought him up ever since. Tim had been drinking for nearly as long, doing homework in a booth at the back rather than staying alone in the apartment 2 floors above. His liver was either pickled as a cucumber or impervious to the onslaught, and Tim knew it. His experience imbibing came in handy when he landed a scholarship to NYU to study geology. He won a fair sum betting other students on drinking games and still had no trouble making every class and scoring well. Tim saved a lot of money being able to continue living in the apartment 2 floors above the bar and getting the day's special for supper. Best of all though, aside from mineralogy classes, one of the math professors hailed from the Gaeltacht. They ate lunch together 3 times a week all 4 years he was enrolled. This gave Tim even more experience speaking the Irish he had learned as a child and had continued to practice with Uncle Jackie and some of the bar patrons. Gaelge and the memory of a visit to the Giant's Causeway that sparked his interest in mineralogy were the only parts of Ireland left in his life. After graduating, the bar and the neighborhood offered little in the way of playing with the rocks Tim loved. He had neither the money nor the interest to pursue the graduate degree required to teach and do research. Having been unable to sort out what to do, he found a job in a museum cataloging a rock collection that had been donated. But once the task was done, so was the job. Tim found work surveying the land and testing soil around the city's reservoirs, patching together a cozy network of pubs away from home in the Catskills whenever he made the rounds. Then fracking came along. Tim jumped at the idea of finding a fresh set of watering holes to pass the weekday evenings in glamorous central Pennsylvania. All of those other courses required for a geology degree paid the bills, but he sometimes almost forgot mineralogy was his passion. Tyler Jordan sat at the table seeming to have forgotten the Irishman. Instead, he straightened his suit out, frowned at the wrinkles still impressed into his coat sleeves, and finally, adopting his best professional demeanor, looked across the table.
Mr. Oren.
The man looked up from the glass.
Tim. Call me Tim.
Tim, my employer is offering.
How much?
Tim asked, cocking his head to the side in obvious interest. Tyler looked up at Carl. Butch and his somewhat smaller buddies had remained interested, leaving Carl intent on using his body as a barrier to any further physical interference. He had used the time to go to the bar and order 2 drinks now in his hands. Finally respecting their cousin's privacy, the trio sank back onto their bar stools, which crackled in protest as the old leather and wood adjusted to their weights. Carl took the chair between Tyler and Tim facing the burly trio. Without acknowledging Carl joining them, Tim repeated.
How much?
Tyler swung a metal briefcase around and placed it on the empty chair between him and Tim.
10, 20, perhaps 30 times what you are making now.
Tim laughed.
If it's oil ye after, I'm not your man. I'm a mineralogist.
We understand that, Mr. Tim. In fact, it is your special interest in minerals that we seek.
Tyler tried to stay professional and yet enigmatic at the same time, which only made him sound pompous and a little geeky. Tim looked them both over. It was transparent he was wondering who the fuck these guys were. They were complete strangers. Tim had never seen them in here nor knew where they came from. He had no idea how they had chosen him, although finding him couldn't have been difficult. It was one of those strange, improbable proposals from an executive tended by muscle that appear in movies. Tim was considering that he'd drunk past his limit and was hallucinating in full color. His specialty in minerals they sought indeed.
Who are you guys?
Tim began looking them up and down.
Are ya serious? Don't be fucking with me head or I'll get Butch back over here,
Tyler adopted his most persuasive negotiating tone.
We are serious, Tim. Quite serious.
The hell with it, the rock jockey thought. Never let it be said that Tim O'Rin looked a gift horse in the mouth.
Fuck it. Where do I sign?
If it all was a dream, he'd wake up at least knowing he had the balls to try it. And if this was really happening, well, he likely would be less brave when he woke up a bit more sober in the morning. Tyler brought the briefcase onto the table quickly. As soon as it was opened, a touch screen came to life. He shifted to the empty chair to operate it while allowing Tim to see the words swim and zip in front of him. A long confidentiality agreement, a few disclaimers, waivers and the like, but it was all too long to really read in front of the anxious gentleman and his bodyguard. Plus, Butch was looking, trying to get a sense of what was going on. For all that money to use his knowledge and love of mineralogy, Tim eagerly signed the document with the tip of his finger as instructed. Tyler snapped the case shut and quickly took his leave, scurrying out before Butch could even make a move in his direction. The sound of rain came in briefly when the interior door was still open as Tyler rushed out to the street. The storm was still pounding heavily on the sidewalks outside. Carl produced the drinks he had brought over earlier, a tall glass of Duvel Belgian Strong Pale Ale for Tim and a club soda for himself. Tim asked,
"How did ye know what I drink?"
Carl just moved the glasses of whiskey out of the way. Too dazed from the speedy recent events on top of his earlier run of drinks, rockstar O'Rin could care less that Carl did not answer. Besides, when he grasped the glass he could tell the beer was the perfect temperature. As Tim started to raise the glass, Carl raised his and finally replied, "A toast."